Monday, November 21st, 2022, regular meeting of the 39th Council of the City of Berkeley. Ms. Mitchell, would you please call the roll?
Councilmember Baker.
Here.
Mayor Pro Tem Dean.
Here.
Councilmember Gavin.
Here.
Councilmember Hennan.
Here.
Councilmember Price.
Here.
Councilmember Valani.
Here.
Mayor Tribrett.
Here. Our first order of business this evening is the approval of tonight's agenda. Is there a motion to approve?
So moved. Support.
Motion made by Councilmember Hennan. Who would like it? Support. Councilmember Valani. Okay. Thank you. Are there any changes or additions? Seeing none. Ms. Mitchell, would you please call the roll?
Dean.
Yes.
Gavin.
Yes.
Hennan.
Yes.
Price.
Yes.
Valani.
Yes.
Baker.
Yes.
Tribrett.
Yes. Before we rise for the Pledge of Allegiance, I want to take a minute to honor our friend and judge, Jamie Wittenberg. Jamie was far more than an incredibly practical, extremely well-respected member of the bench. He was an even better father to his four beautiful daughters, husband to Stacy, and friend to all that he encountered. His impact on our community, but more importantly, his impact on people, will never be accurately measured, described, or matched. Judge Wittenberg passed away over the weekend, and on behalf of the City of Berkeley, I offer our most sincere and humble condolences to Jamie's family and all who had the pleasure of knowing him. Saying that he will be missed simply does not come close to conveying the magnitude of our feelings, but his impact on me, on our community, and everybody in his world will truly live on forever. Before continuing, please join me in a moment of silence honoring Judge Jamie Wittenberg. Now, please rise for the pledge. I pledge allegiance
to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
We now move on to public comments. Per our normal rules and procedures, these are public comments for items that are not included on tonight's agenda. You will have the opportunity to speak on a specific agenda item while it is being considered. Remember, council members will not engage you in discussion, but if your concern needs to be addressed by a member of city staff or department of the city, please sign in at the clerk's desk. When you come up to the microphone, please state your name and city of residence. You will probably have 3 minutes to speak, but I may be a little liberal depending on how things go. Okay. While people are gathering their thoughts, Ms. Mitchell, do you have anything to be read?
Yes, Your Honor.
Okay.
We have one email from Paul Jordan. Please remove the invocation from council meetings as divisive.
Okay. Thank you. Seeing nobody else rushing to the microphone for public comments, we will close that and move on to this evening's order of business. First up is our consent agenda. Ms. Mitchell, would you please read those items?
1, approval of the minutes. Matter of approving the minutes of the 39th regular city council meeting on Monday, October 17th, 2022. 2, warrant. Matter of approving warrant number 1380.
Is there a motion to approve the consent agenda?
So moved.
Support. Motion made by Councilmember Baker with support from Councilmember Gavin. Are there any changes or corrections? Seeing none, Ms. Mitchell, would you please call the roll on our consent agenda?
Gavin,
Yes.
Hennan,
Yes.
Price,
Yes.
Valani,
Yes.
Baker,
Yes.
Dean,
Yes.
Turbrack.
Yes. We now move on to our regular agenda. Ms. Mitchell, would you please read item number 1?
Recognitions, presentations, matter of any recognitions or presentations from the consent agenda.
Seeing none, we move on to item number 2, please.
Motion number M 102-22, matter of authorizing the city manager to execute 2 contracts for senior home chore snow removal service with Tinsley Landscape and Hardscape LLC, 30728 Osmond Street, Madison Heights, Michigan, 48071. One contract will be remaining CDBG funds of $2,604, and one will be pending for release of CDBG funds of $3,887.
Is there a motion to approve M 10222?
So moved. Support.
Motion made by Mayor Pro Tem Dean with support from Councilmember Villani. Mr. Baumgarten?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. You're joined by our Parks and Recreation Director, Teresa McCarlton, this evening to talk about how we use our CDBG funds, which is an acronym for Community Development Block Grant. It's a federal allocation that we receive as a part of our county program. And we put those to use every year. There's a planned out process. As you know, we go through a public hearing. We have a plan for each fund year. These items are going to be coming, the next year's will be coming back before you in December. But we've just now got our authorization to spend for our home tour program, which are funded through these federal dollars and administered by the Parks and Recreation Department.
Ms. McCarlton?
Good evening. So this comes before you every year. We bid this service out because it is Community Development Block Grant funds. This year, what's a little bit different is that because there are funds from one program year and another from a program year that is pending, there's 2 contracts. Basically says the same thing. It just releases the money from the county so that those funds can be used for snow removal for this year. We think this is an invaluable service. It's one that used to be run in a number of communities, and that number continues to go down because it's not always easy to continue it and to find great vendors to do it. We did work with this vendor last year, and they did an absolutely fantastic job. We were really pleased with them. So the fact that we only got 1 bid, we obviously prefer more, but the fact that it was a company that we had worked with and did a great job. We currently have about 36 homes that are signed up. Again, these are seniors that call, they ask for an application, we send them an application, and then they either have a $5, $10, or a $15 copay, depending on HUD income limits. Most of our seniors are at that 5, and then some are at that 10. We've usually had 1 or 2 that are at that 15 level. So again, when you look at what the city is paying and what we're getting, it's an invaluable service. We think it's, about safety and about seniors being able to get out of their homes and travel. We do have about a 3-inch limit in terms of the snowfall. Anything under that, they typically won't go out. But, if we get a 3 or more, then they are out. And they did a great job for us last year. Within 24 hours, everything was cleared.
Questions for our director? Councilmember Price?
Yes, thank you very much for offering this service and organizing this for our seniors. You mentioned that you already have 36 applications. Is it too late for people to apply for this season?
It's not. We typically we like to stay around 40, but if, it's 41 or 42, we will take that. So if people want to apply, they can call us. It's 248-658-3470, or they can come in the community center, get an application, complete it, and then get it back to us, and then we'll be able to service them.
Fantastic, thank you.
Councilmember Hennan, was that?
That was my
Okay.
question.
All right, excellent. Additional questions?
She had mine as well.
Look at that. I guess great minds all seem to think alike. Well, thank you, Teresa, for bringing this to us. It is an incredibly important service, and we will hopefully be able to provide that again. Ms. Mitchell, would you please call the roll on M 10222?
Hennan,
Yes.
Price,
Yes.
Valani,
Yes.
Baker,
Yes.
Dean,
Yes.
Gavin,
Yes.
Turbrack.
Yes. We now move on to item number 3, please, Ms. Mitchell.
Resolution number R 2322, matter of a resolution of authorization and support for a Spark grant application from the DNR in the amount of $300,000 with a $100,000 match for J.C. Park improvements. Funds for this expenditure will come from account 614-950-974-000.
Is there a motion to approve R2322?
So moved.
Support.
Motion made by Mayor Pro Tem Dean with support from Councilmember Price. Mr. Baumgarten?
Mr. Mayor, Director McCarlton has the pertinent details. I do just want to say her and her staff continue to be aggressive in leveraging any and all potential resources to improve our parks. Kudos to her for the work that she's put into this and the work that I know administering a grant is on the back end as well. But it's all for the betterment of our parks.
Ms. McCarlton?
So I'm really excited to bring this to you. The Spark grants are a little unique in that they came about, the DNR, the state DNR got federal dollars, and it was about $65 million, and they said, okay, spend it, right, to the DNR. So they had to really catch up to the infrastructure, and this all happened really recently. We're talking July, August, September. So this was new to them, new to us, but they're having 3 different applications within this calendar year, within a year starting December 19th, and then they'll have 2 other times. We think it's important to get on the front end of it to apply quickly. They're going to be highly competitive. A whole lot of communities are going to be applying. I attended a webinar and there were over 600 communities that, so they're going to be very competitive, but they do have these dollars. And we identified a project. We're in the process of updating JC Park, and one of the things that we want to do is add restrooms and then update the pavilion there. So our thought was we can take, instead of using all capital city funds, if we can get a large amount of those funds from this Spark grant, that would be a great use of what the grant is for, which is access, which is recreation, and which is improving spaces. We're already in the process of updating that, building an inclusive playground, doing walkways with city funds. There was not a required match, but my phrasing is not required but admired. It certainly strengthens the application, and so we felt like putting up $100,000 of the city's money, but still going aggressively for a very large amount from the Spark grant was the best use of funds. We'll be working with HRC in terms of a lot of the building specs and that sort of thing, but the narrative will all come from with my office. Certainly familiar with that from the grant that we just closed out from the state. So really excited to get this done in the next couple of weeks. And what's great about the Spark grants is that if we don't get the first round, our application can be considered for the other 2 rounds. So again, getting that in that first round, I think is really important. And it's such a tight turnaround that I'm hoping that we will, maybe not everybody will be able to do it, but we're going to be working fast and furiously to get that in. And we'll find out as soon as January if we got it in that first round.
Excellent. Questions for our director on all the good things she said?
Right. I
Mayor
don't,
Pro
thank
Tem.
you, Your Honor. I don't really have a question. I just want to tell you I admire your tenacity, and I like the way you think. It's all, leans in our favor. So fingers crossed, we'll all be pulling for you and your team as you submit this grant, and hopefully we'll get that funding. And I do want to reiterate, just as the liaison to the Parks and Rec Advisory Board, I know all the grants you've applied for. I know how you are rigorous with what's out there, what could potentially work for us, and so thank you for that, Teresa.
Additional questions or comments? No, I mean, that was very well said. Yes, no, we certainly do appreciate the grants. Anybody who's ever been involved in a grant in any capacity knows that it's a pain in part of your body, posterior, in fact. And you have to be very, very precise and specific, and any error in any kind can completely throw that off. So the fact that you've not only been very successful in the past and continue to look for opportunities to help improve our community is incredibly helpful and grateful. So thank you so much for that. Ms. Mitchell, would you please call the roll on R2322?
Price,
Yes.
Valani,
Yes.
Baker,
Yes.
Dean,
Yes.
Gavin,
Yes.
Hendon,
Yes.
Turbrack.
Yes. Ms. Mitchell, please read item number 4 on tonight's agenda.
Motion number M10322, matter of authorizing the city manager to approve the proposal from Hubble, Roth, and Clark, Inc., HRC, to provide professional engineering services at a cost not to exceed $31,727 for J.C. Park grant work for the Building and Utility Improvement Project. Funds for this expenditure will come from account 614-950-974-000.
Is there a motion to approve M10322?
Motion to approve.
Support.
Motion to approve by Mayor Pro Tem Dean with support from Councilmember Hennan. We go to you first this time?
Mayor, I'll defer to the director.
Okay. Ms. McCarlton.
So
you're still up.
this is as a result of applying for this grant, we need professional engineering services, and that's where this comes from. I'll be working closely with Adriana Melchior from HRC, who I worked closely with in doing the Oxford Park project. The great thing about this is all the work that we do for the grant in terms of the specs, in terms of the building, in terms of the pavilion, hopefully we're saying, well, we get the grant, but no matter what, those projects will continue at some point. So the work will be useful, grant specific, and if we didn't get the grant, we're going to get the grant. So it's necessary. We need a certified professional engineer. It's actually required in terms of when you're submitting things to the DNR that you have a certified professional engineer sign off on many of the documents that you submit. And again, Adriana and I went through this with the Oxford Park project and had a really successful relationship working through that. And over the course of the years that we submitted that grant work and then actually got the project done. So I look forward to working with her closely again and getting this started. And we're actually meeting at the park tomorrow. We've had meetings and conversations, but we're having an on-site meeting tomorrow.
Any questions for our director? She's getting tired of standing. No? Okay, well, I think you've done a wonderful job explaining that. We know what we're doing here. And I'm also glad to hear that the working relationship with you and HRC and Adriana is wonderful. I want to continue that. Ms. Mitchell, would you please call the roll on M10322?
Valani,
Yes.
Baker,
Yes.
Dean,
Yes.
Gavin,
Yes.
Hennan,
Yes.
Price,
Yes.
Turbrack.
Yes. Ms. Mitchell, would you please read item number 5 on tonight's agenda?
Motion number M104-22, matter of authorizing the city manager to approve the proposal from Hubble, Roth, and Clark, Inc., HRC, to provide professional engineering services at a cost not to exceed $14,512.65 for J.C. Park walkway work. Funds for this expenditure will come from account 614-950-821-000.
Is there a motion to approve M10422?
Motion to approve.
Support.
Motion to approve by Mayor Pro Tem Dean with support from Councilmember Baker. Ms. McCarlton.
So prior to the Spark grants being released, we were already working with HRC to talk about capital funding that we had, which was to improve the walkways at JC. We're adding an inclusive playground. We want it to be accessible to get there, and the walkways currently are not in great shape. So we were already working with them. This is, again, with HRC, but kind of a separate scope. This will be bid along with the walkway at Oxford, which will be rebid, and some work that Public Works is doing as well with walkways. And so kind of using trying to get as many things together to be as efficient and effective as possible. This will, again, allow access from both sides of the street, from the parking, and really get access to the inclusive play, to the pavilion, and to hopefully what is a new restroom facility. So I had already had all of those meetings. That work needs to get done as well, and that is work that I'll be working on with HRC. Mostly Eddie Zmitch will be the person that I'll be working with on that, and both items will be hopefully bid out around the same time, assuming that we get the grant.
Okay. Questions for our director? She just has nothing but wonderful news about our parks today. A tireless advocate for our parks, and we are incredibly excited to get this underway and hopefully bid both of those out and improve accessibility in both of those places. Seeing no additional questions or comments, Ms. Mitchell, we're going to keep on rolling. Would you please call the roll on M10422?
Baker,
Yes.
Dean,
Yes.
Gavin,
Yes.
Hennan,
Yes.
Price,
Yes.
Valani,
Yes.
Turbrack.
Yes. That's it, you're leaving? Ms. Mitchell, would you please read item number 6 on tonight's agenda?
Motion number M10522, matter of considering the recommendations of the Coolidge Task Force regarding the Complete Streets Pilot Project.
Is there a motion to approve M10522?
So moved.
Support.
Motion made by Councilmember Gavin with support from Councilmember Villani. Mr. Baumgarten.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I will be presenting the recommendations on behalf of the committee this evening. Picking you back a little bit, the recommendation, this Complete Streets program started way back in 2019. The conversations preceded that even by a decade or so, as the council had adopted Complete Streets ordinances as well as Complete Street resolutions. So this was the culmination of a great deal of work, even to get to the point where we were able to put this paint on the ground and test all of the tested theories and ideas that have been implemented across the country for many, many years by the point that we came to it in 2019. In order to fully evaluate how that pilot program went, the city brought together a multidisciplinary task force that included our Director of Public Works, our Director of Public Safety, the principal of Berkley High School, representatives from the Transportation Improvement Association, or TIA, our own traffic engineers from Helper Roth and Clark, myself as the city manager, our executive director of our DDA, 2 residents, as well as a business representative as well. So we tried to look at this from as many different potential avenues as possible. And over the course of studying this, the city had went through a series of traffic studies. So in March of 2019, we did our baseline study. So before we changed anything with the intermittent turn lane with 4 lanes, we studied the traffic volumes and looked to see how well the traffic flowed, how much was not only on Coolidge but also on our side streets as well. And we looked at several different points of study there. We went through crash data and looked to see what the last 2 years worth of crashes looked like. And then we also went through speeds and looked at what the traffic speeds were up and down the corridor as well. All of these things were going to be studied throughout the process. The first of those studies happened about 6 months after the project implementation, and that was in November of 2019. And we looked at, again, all that same data. And then, but the timeline was supposed to be 12 months. And so from a traffic and safety functionality standpoint, we looked forward to having another set of data points to look at in May of 2020. Taking you back a little bit, May of 2020 was in the midst of state-mandated work from home, as well as virtual schooling, also state mandated as well. So our volumes were not useful data for us. No, we were not able to get any of the items that any data that we could rely on those baseline items was basically going to yield results that we knew we couldn't trust and were reflective of how the corridor functions in a normal space. So at that point, we had to pause this project and essentially wait for what we thought was a return to, I'm going to take you way back here, a new normal. We all heard that for 2 straight years, so we thought we may have been back in that point in the spring of 2021. As we looked at it, we did all the same volumes. It looked like on Coolidge, we had about 85 to 92% of the volume had returned by that point. At that point, we decided to wait another 6 months and see truly if studying 6 months would yield a growing amount of traffic coming back, or if it would yield that this is now a stable pattern. When we did so in November of 2021 and found that, yes, it basically reflected the same thing that we had seen 6 months previous. And TIA, who was our traffic experts and took the broader view than just Berkley, they were the ones that truly told us that, yeah, this is pretty reflective of what we're seeing across the board. So this is the data that we have acted upon since that point. It was gathered in November of 2021. During that period, we also went through a process of signalization optimization. One of the most consistent pieces of feedback that we received was the difficulty of getting in and out of the flow of traffic. Traffic was moving so efficiently that it did not create the same breaks in traffic, allowing people to enter from side streets or from our curb cuts in our local businesses. So we went through a process of trying to find a level of service that best accommodated all users of the road. And finally, we got to that point. We were about 12 months removed from the traffic studies, a couple months removed through the traffic signalization when we brought that task force back together in October 26th of this year. At that point, they looked at the draft form of the document that you have here, and with the 4 recommendations that eventually ended up moving forward, and the group offered some feedback and some items that they would want to see. Credit to the task force, the entire data section is a credit to information that they wanted to see included in this. We've been posting the raw data for the traffic numbers, but the committee did say they wanted that featured in the report in order to back up some of the findings that they were coming to. And also the section on the bike lanes, it was fleshed out, became more robust, made some of the points about functionally the instances of points of contact that you would have as a bike lane user, specific to our area of Coolidge, where we do have curb cuts, we've got parking lanes, and then making it very clear that no design at all, period, absolves a driver or a cyclist or a pedestrian of their responsibility to be a safe user of whatever mode of transportation they're currently in. So a driver needs to be aware, a cyclist needs to be aware, and pedestrians need to be aware of what's happening around them. And you cannot design away that vast responsibility for any of those users. So that brought us to the point that we are this evening, where we have a fleshed out final set of recommendations for the council this evening. And I can go through and summarize them for you here. They really looked at 4 different functional elements of this pilot project. The first of which is the travel and turn lanes. If you recall, Coolidge previously had 4 travel lanes, 2 in north and 2 to the south, as well as a non-contiguous left center turn lane. So if you will remember back, there were in times there was no turn lane, so the vehicle in the inside lane would just wait for the traffic to break, and they would make that turn. Or as you got to one of the larger intersections, the lane would open up. And then we weren't able to have parking because it pushed the lanes to the side. So it gave kind of this snake-like feel to traveling down Coolidge. The recommendation here is to not return to that particular design, but to keep the continuous left center turn lane in place and keep the single lane of traffic north and south in place. So next functional element, moving to the parking lanes themselves. The parking lanes were able to then also be contiguous up and down the corridor as well. But we saw larger instances of people driving in those lanes. They are wide open. We did not do the perpendicular striping in the initial round here, again, thinking this was going to be a 12-month study. So the recommendation there is to put those perpendicular stripings in, make it look more like a parking lane. Also would give us a good data point to count the number of spaces we have now. Right now we're able to estimate at best based on how the average width of a vehicle, but striping those perpendicular lanes would give us a hard number of the number of spaces we provide, and that's something we can tout as an economic development option to say, hey, this is not only free parking, but it's this many parking spaces up and down our corridor, which again makes it a great place to own and operate a business. Also, we have the recommendation of mirroring the approach that we took on 12 Mile many years ago and utilizing traffic bump outs. And so that would actually has the function of protecting the vehicles that are in those lanes, but also stopping motorists from traversing up and down as if it's an alternate travel lane as well. Next up, let's see. Next up, we have the depth as well. I should mention the depth. If anyone remembers previously, this wasn't a big point of contention before. This is, I think, one of the consensus favorite parts based on some of the feedback I've gotten. The parking bays along Coolidge used to be very shallow, and it was very uncomfortable to get in and out of your vehicle, especially if you were exiting a vehicle on the side closest to the travel lanes. This project did add depth to those parking bays and made it more comfortable to get in and out of your vehicle, utilizing on-street parking while shopping, dining, however you're enjoying one of our central business districts. The third recommendation coming to you is specific to the intersections. This project changed the design of 2 different intersections. The first one was on 11 Mile in Coolidge. The second one is on 12 Mile in Coolidge. In both those cases, we had to change those intersections to accommodate the shift from 4 lanes to 3 lanes. On 11 Mile, that outside lane became a dedicated right turn only. On the north side, at 12 Mile, motorists went through the intersection and then condensed down. Over the course of the last couple of years, we found that the 11 Mile design is more functional. and causes less potential for vehicle interactions. I'll tell you anecdotally, City Hall is right across from that merge point, just south of 12 Mile. We frequently hear vehicles communicating by a horn with one another as the rush to merge. It's causing some contention, certainly some frustration for drivers. So the recommendation from the task force is to have those vehicles merge north of that intersection before proceeding through, and again mirroring that outside lane being a right turn only as we have at 11 Mile. The fourth and final recommendation is specific to the bike lanes. I think the bike lanes have probably yielded the most attention of any functional element of this project. And for context, after the center turn lane was designed, after the travel lanes were added, and then after the parking lanes were expanded, we had about 11 feet worth of additional space curb to curb. That's not wide enough to really accommodate two-way traffic at all. We weren't talking about physically moving curb in this project. So the bike lanes ended up being sort of an answer to a remainder question. And they were split into two, and 5.5-foot bike lanes were added in between the parking bays and the travel lanes on either side. Admittedly, and as we say this in our recommendations as well, it really only accommodated hyper-local bike lane traffic. There's not connectivity to a network at this point, and I think that really impacted the use of the bike lanes. Now, we are working on some non-motorized travel lanes north of 12 to try to get people to the Woodward Commons, the Woodward Corner development. Our neighbors to the south, Huntington Woods and Oak Park, are working on fleshing out their bike lane network as well. So eventually we feel like it will go somewhere, but not having that really did, I think, impact the use of it over the course of these 12 months. One of the unintentional benefits, but probably one of the highest benefits that bike lanes did offer throughout this project is it was an additional buffer for individuals exiting their vehicles, parking on street, and the travel lane. So you really had an extra 5.5 feet to not feel like vehicles were going to impact or injure or come after you in some way. So that was a nice comfort level. The overall recommendation here is to keep the bike lanes in place for now until some long-term project would move the curb in some way. There was a strong recommendation from our committee members. Mr. Height, who's in the audience this evening, was a very strong advocate for this, adopting a Swedish model. If you look to Sweden's bike lanes, they have a very, very robust bike network, and they really try to do a better job of anywhere else in the world of making those protected bike lanes and giving those bike cyclists their space. And it's not a space that's shared. It is fully protected and fully embodied in the road. It's just part of the culture and part of the network there. If we get to the point where we're physically moving curb, then the recommendation is to study something more robust like that. Short of that, for the time being, while we're really still just talking about sort of paint on the ground, if you will, the recommendation is to keep the bike lane in place and not remove it completely. Again, a big driver of that is not only the data that we have here, but also just there's not a lot of great other options until we physically change something in the road. So that is, in summary, the four recommendations that we have. Not included in this study, sort of out of scope, but in the same corridor, are conversations regarding crosswalks. DDA has made some fantastic progress on planning for and building out safer crosswalks. One of the things that this project does do is remove two of the blind spots that contributed to previous pedestrian accidents, but also ultimately shorten the travel distance for a pedestrian as they cross the travel lane. So we're going from, they don't cross 4 lanes anymore, they cross 2 travel lanes now, which ultimately would be a safety benefit. So on behalf of the committee, we do offer these recommendations for your consideration, and we hope that you guys would consider adopting them.
Before opening this up to discussion from the residents and council, it has been brought to my attention that we are having some technical difficulties. So we are actually going to take a brief 3, 4, maximum of 5-minute recess right now so that we can make sure that the residents at home are able to watch with us. So we'll be back in just a minute. City Manager, went through some of the initial data collection and recommendations of the multidisciplinary committee that met. There are 4 recommendations that we will be looking at and discussing today. Before we have those deliberations, so I want to open it up to folks that are here with us if they have any comments before council discusses. When you come to the microphone, please state your name, city of residence.
Hello, my name is Jonas Reimer. I am a resident of Berkley, Harvard Road. I would heavily recommend that. So whenever I'm on Coolidge on my bike, I consistently look behind me a lot in fear that some guy is going to run up on my, And I would really recommend that the bike lanes be protected in any way, shape, or form possible. I believe one of the main reasons you don't see many people on there is because it gives the feeling of being unsafe. Somebody could just kind of ram in there and run you over. With protection, you could probably get more people on the bike lane in the first place. I would also like to see I personally believe that the parking should be removed. I believe that even now, if you want to keep it, it should be moved to this. So you got the 2 lanes, right? The 2 travel lanes, parking, and then the bike lanes, so cars aren't moving in and out constantly, if you know what I mean. I would also like to see some bus stops improved. I know there's a bus line that runs down Coolidge, and a lot of the stops are just a sign, and adding a shelter would be really useful for those who ride smart along Coolidge. I'd also like to preface for the road design that it should be safer overall for pedestrians and cyclists. And I would also like to see some improvements, such as maybe doing what Kercheval Avenue in Detroit. I'm going to use it as an example. The bike lane on Kercheval is a 2-way on one side, and on the other side, I believe, is a dedicated for bus stops. You could probably take Kercheval as inspiration for Coolidge. And that's all I really have to say. Thank you.
Thank you, Jonas.
Charles Terrell from Berkley. The jewel of the left turn lane and using that for emergency vehicles has been tarnished. There are crosswalk signs now in the left turn lane. And in my mind, in my view, I can't see an ambulance or a fire truck being able to get through there without running into the crosswalk signs. And things were supposed to be left with no changes during the evaluation period. Lights were retimed. The your speed is now signs went up. So did speed slow down because of the design of the road, or did it slow down because of the your speed is now signs? We don't know. You can't break that out because the change was made. You can't go back and undo, the lights were retimed. So that was another change that was made. You're not comparing data points that are consistent. So there's that whole issue of making those things. Let's be precise with our language. We're not talking about crosswalks going across 2 lanes of traffic. Crosswalks are going across 7 lanes. And being run into by a car is bad. It's a horrible thing, but even being run into by a bicycle is a bad thing. So pedestrians have to go through 7 lanes. And with the parking, that makes it harder for pedestrians to see. So yeah, they're crossing 7 lanes. They're not crossing 2. If you want to say lanes of vehicle travel, okay, there's 3. It's not 2. Be precise with the language that we're using in all of this. I attended the first task force meeting, and one of the things that came out in the first task force meeting that I remember very vividly is that the number of crashes went down a little bit. It was not proportional with the decline in traffic. In essence, that means that Coolidge became more dangerous, not safer, because there was the same amount of, basically the same amount of crashes for less traffic. So it's not safer. I think what the experiment and the pilot has done is proven this thing is not workable. And my recommendation is to go back and put Coolidge back as how it was.
Thank you, Chuck.
Good evening, Kurt Height, Berkley on Robina. I was part of the Berkley, the Coolidge Task Force, and I'm proud of my input of the final document. I'm happy to see some of the changes I recommended in there as far as the recommendations for the bike lane. I mean, I'm not against bike lanes. I was against the way this one is implemented. I mean, to me, I like this gentleman. I really liked his input on how to make it safer and stuff like that. I mean, that's been one of my biggest things. I just want to say that I want to be clear, because the reason why there was supposed to be a task force was originally we were supposed to talk about what was going to be measured, how it was going to be measured, and what equaled good or bad for those measurements. We were supposed to determine all that before it even started. That never happened. I want to make that clear. It never happened. Even by the time I got an invite to the first task force meeting I got an invite to was December of 2020. That was the first meeting I came to that I attended. I received an email. I said, okay, cool, I'm part of it. I showed up. And I missed only one meeting out of all the meetings that were held since then, which were only a handful of them. Originally, we agreed that we were going to measure, and after we decided how it was going to be measured, what was going to be measured, we were going to meet and have a meeting on the data for every 6 months, so that then we could present it to council and say, this is the good or bad of it for every point that we determined beforehand. Every meeting that I attended, the question was, well, where is this data? Did we get new counts? How are we measuring it? Was this good? Who determined that this increase over here was okay? Which we heard that, oh yeah, one of the experts said that amount for that road is okay in that area because it's still serviceable. But to me, that wasn't, the agreement was that the multidisciplinary board was going to determine beforehand what was acceptable. And also, and now, okay, to be fair, there's no residents here complaining, but that was almost like a result of, if it went on too long, eventually more people would get tired of talking about it anyways. That's why it was important to have it over a 12-year period, or 2 years, I think, really, because you wanted to also measure the financial impact. But even the last meeting that we had, and again, I'm proud of the input I had in it, but we still, the crash data, even though it had been collected, we weren't presented with it. Nobody was able to look at it and say, we only saw it one time. The first time we saw it at the first meeting, it was the same amount of crashes. It was a different type of crash. It was rear ends instead of more side bumps. But in all cases, they weren't serious injuries involved. So it was more of somebody prefers to have rear ends instead of side bumps. I mean, I can't tell you that that's safe or not. I can tell you that if you have the same number of crashes for less cars, that the ratio is a lot higher for the crashes. That I can tell you. But this document, as I was telling Matt, I mean, I feel like this kind of a document is something that with enough people, we could have input it, and we could have this type of document before it started to say that this is what we want to do and these are the kind of design elements we want to have, instead of just one person doing it the way they did it. And I just feel that hampered the type of study that we could have had. Now, as far as traffic, I mean, I do see some numbers that, oh, before I forget, I heard something on the radio when I pulled in my car. I heard it the other night. Traffic, they determined, is now at the level it was pre-pandemic. Finally now as at this point. So take it with a grain of salt. I mean, I guess if we were starting to measure today, we could probably get a valid comparison. I don't know. The pandemic screwed up everything as far as, I mean, and that's not anybody's fault. We can't, that part of it, we can't say that anybody foresaw there being a pandemic and that we could not count traffic, okay? But that being said, we knew that if it was a prolonged thing and it kind of got pushed off, that it was just gonna, there was no way to really, nobody was gonna be on top of as far as, you know, people get tired of going up, you know, hey, I don't like it, hey, I don't like it. They eventually stopped talking about it because they kind of either avoid it or whatever. I mean, there was never really a study done to say, you know, which we had one done in like late December or 2018, that actually did a study that talked about traffic patterns. This many people went right and left at 12 Mile going southbound, and this people went, you know, where people were turning off and on. That, the type of study we did never included that as far as determine were people avoiding Coolidge at the main intersections. And then, you know, nobody ever said, hey, where are we counting the traffic at to determine when people are getting back onto Coolidge, or are they just going all the way down to 11 Mile and then getting back onto Coolidge? I mean, there was never a determination of how we're going to count it and what that data would tell us. It was the first count was there were streets on it. You look at it and say, why would you count that? Anybody that lives in this area knows that that street would not be used as to bypass Coolidge. And, you know, there was one, I mean, I could give out one glaring example, but there's also, why wouldn't you count here, here, there? Why wouldn't you count this? I mean, it was all these things of, there was never anything to make it, I never heard any discussion, I was never part of any discussion that said, these are now where we're going to count and then we're going to compare it to this. It was just, well, we're going to do recounts at this point when we think it's appropriate, and then it was done in whatever. But again, we don't have any pre-existing determinations of saying, what are we looking for, why are we counting there, and what's good or bad. It's just, we count it and we make do with what the counts we have, because we don't have anything, we don't have any basis to compare it to now. So while I'm proud of my involvement in the group, and I'm sorry, I'll finish up. I'm proud of my involvement in the group, and I'm happy with the result of the document that's being presented, more so than what was the rough draft. I just feel that it needs to be said that it's not, the task force, I don't feel the task force fulfilled the job for which they should have been involved in. And there was only 4 people, really 4 people up there. The other citizen only was at the 2 meetings in 2021, and I didn't see her this time. But she also shared some of the concern with the data. She has some very valid, you know, points and concerns and stuff that I hadn't even thought about. And I just want to say that it would have been nice to see if it hadn't been carried over so long, I think the involvement would have stayed consistent. But at the end of the thing, it was me, it was, you know, the public safety, the DPW, and the TIA expert. And then we had, you know, and Matt was involved, of course, too, but it wasn't the same. Even the input from the people who were supposed to be involved on the task force was not the same input because they weren't there. So I just wanted to make sure that was clear. So
Thank you, Kurt. I appreciate your comments, and thank you for your service on the task force. Thank you.
Mr. Mayor, just as a note on some of the changing faces, because we had to accommodate the pandemic period, we did see some changing faces on that body. Public Works Director did change over. Our traffic engineer ended up changing over as well. Our representative from TIA, the Transportation Improvement Authority, changed over. And then Chris Germain was who Kurt was referencing. Mr. Germain moved and was replaced on that body with Chris Kopatia, who was also a resident as well. So Kurt was absolutely right about that. Some of those faces did change over the course of this project.
Thank you. Obviously, as was mentioned, the pandemic was not supposed to be part of this plan or pilot, and obviously made things go a little bit longer than intended, and forced some other changes that we had to, you know, kind of get through, just like everything else throughout the last couple of years. Feedback from council on the recommendations here. Councilmember Price?
One question, the feedback that we received from public safety, was that collected before or after the updates to the crosswalks? Do you know?
Regarding,
The signs being put into the center turn lane, did that happen before or after the feedback that we received from public safety on this?
that happened before, just prior to the October 26th meeting. Those went out, and those are uprights. They are not permanently affixed to it, so if they got bumped into the turn lane, they can be moved back out. But they're intended to be placed between the lanes, between the, like on the line of demarcation between the center turn lane and the travel lane. If they got moved, we'll move them back, but they're not permanently affixed inside the turn lane. That is designed to be wide open.
Okay, so from the public safety's feedback, I don't see any concern about their access to use the center turn lane for emergency vehicles being blocked by.
Correct. Yeah,
The
they've been
updates
consistent
to the
about that throughout. Yeah,
crosswalks.
that that was a design improvement for their purposes.
Thank you for clarifying that for me.
And they were involved in those conversations as well, certainly before they went out.
Thank you.
Additional questions, or I guess not questions, maybe comments on what we're looking at here in the recommendations? Councilmember Hennan?
Well, either with the road diet or without the road diet, Coolidge sucks. It just ends up sucking in different ways. So I do think we could have done a better job collecting data, but you know, this isn't an easy decision, but when I weigh the factors, I do think the road diet is the best choice overall. Traffic is harder to get into sometimes. Traffic is worse at rush hour, but it is safer. It has increased parking, and it's highly popular with a lot of business in our city departments. I do echo a lot of the concerns with the bike lanes. If we keep them longer term, we're going to need to be committed to keeping a high quality, smooth surface and keeping it clean, and ideally keeping them separated. And so those are my thoughts.
Okay. Thank you. Additional, nope, Councilmember Vellani?
I guess for our city manager, I know that the public safety noted school district should provide some input as well. Did we receive anything from them, given that we are a walking district? And
Right.
I know as a parent of a middle schooler, she rides her bike or walks to school, so I know that's a frequent mode of transportation. So did we get any feedback from the school district?
We did, yeah. Principal Maloche, Andy Maloche, was on our task force steering committee. He wasn't able to be at the previous meeting, but he reviewed the draft and did send feedback that he recommends that we move forward and to bring that to council and that he agree with the recommendations.
Okay, thank you.
Councilmember Baker?
Thank you, Your Honor. Well, first I want to thank the city manager for his excellent synopsis. You did a great job summarizing everything. I really appreciate the, kind of setting the context and walking us through everything. I was really appreciative of that. And as liaison to DDA, I know that our Downtown Development Authority has spoken about this often, as we, there's that body looks at both the broader flow of Coolidge traffic as well as the crosswalks. And I'm pleased to see our director here tonight if he has any comments from them as well. And then just as a step back again, from being the original sponsor of this back in 2010 and again in 2018, to see us at this point tonight, I think is a big step forward for our community, to begin to take active steps and more formalize putting safety first, right? And I think that as the document describes, there's a lot of great things about it. There's always room for further improvement, but I think, putting it in reverse isn't the right idea for Coolidge. So I'm very happy to see this on the agenda tonight.
Thank you. Did you have more?
Yeah,
Yep.
I want to echo off of that. There are deficiencies with it for sure, and I think it's a longer-term view that there aren't, we did it as a low-cost project to begin with, and a longer-term commitment to further enhancements, I think, will make the changes that have been made more appreciated as we start to get improvements there, and frankly, it be more like a 12-mile and the kind of things we do on Coolidge.
Okay. Any additional comments? Well, to sort of echo what Councilmember Hennan said, although a little differently. Is it perfect? No. Is it going to be perfect? Probably never. I don't know that that is actually possible. Is it better? It certainly appears to be. Is it safer? Yes, in a number of ways. Has it slowed traffic and allowed folks to see some of the businesses there? Definitely. I think we can say that. But it was not a perfect pilot. It was not a perfect data collection. It is not necessarily a perfect outcome yet. There is still work to do that has been discussed many times and brought up by these comments. But, you know, moving backwards doesn't seem to be the most prudent decision right now, especially not only from the recommendations from the committee, but also in the number of folks. I've received a few comments. And I was at a wedding Friday and had a rousing 15-minute conversation on Coolidge, a few beverages deep. That was delightful. So it will be a topic of conversation, yes. And is there work to continue to do, especially as it relates to the safety of those bike lanes, as we heard today, and moving forward with a plan that may incorporate more into the infrastructure to really make it what we want. But again, that being said, I don't know that perfect is ever going to be a description for much of especially what we do in the municipal world. That doesn't generally happen. And the fact that the pandemic really did change the way that we wanted to study this is something that we're aware of. And that's okay. We have to make adjustments. We're able to get there, and we're able to get here today, and we do have these recommendations, the four that were discussed before. So without any additional comments, Ms. Mitchell, would you please call the roll on M10522?
Dean,
Yes.
Gavin,
Yes.
Hennan,
Yes.
Price,
Yes.
Valani,
Yes.
Baker,
Yes.
Turbrack.
Yes. Ms. Mitchell, would you please read item number 7 on tonight's agenda?
Resolution number R2422, matter of adopting the Berkley Downtown Design Guidelines.
Is there a motion to approve R2422?
So moved, Your Honor.
Support. A motion made by Councilmember Baker with support from Councilmember Gavin. Mr. Baumgarten?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I'll be filling in for Ms. Kaplansky this evening, who is not able to attend. But she has really picked up this project and is one that has languished, as she mentions in her memo, for quite a while. And she really helped guide these through across the finish line with the help of our DDA Executive Director, Mike McGinnis, who is here this evening, thankfully. So I'm representing some of the main points and notes that she's included in your memo, as well as what she'd asked me to read to you as far as the by email. So I apologize. I will not do a good enough a job, certainly not as good a job as she would do, having worked so closely with these. But she did ask me to iterate that the ordinance portion of it, which is the second of the two items, implements the design guidelines, allowing for some discretion and interpretation, but also including qualitative requirements in limited instances. For example, for providing for building to lines in some districts, build two lines in some districts to create a cohesive street wall, which is something that you really do see in a lot of classic and historical downtowns, and it's something that we've chased for quite a while in our street design here as well. Next item, absent of full-scale development of the site, applicants would only be required to implement those portions of the guidelines that apply to aspects of the site that they are changing. So we're not waiting around for a full redevelopment of a site in order to start taking those steps towards getting something that we know and that the Planning Commission supports and that we believe is the right step for Berkley. Last up, specifically the ordinance again. Should council adopt the guidelines and consider adopting the first reading, the ordinance will provide the Planning Commission with guidance from the community, the ability to steer applicants to general aesthetic, and the inclusion of aspects we would like to encourage, such as additional landscaping, quality building materials, and green infrastructure elements, which are all items that we've taken from the conversation from our master plan, which, as you know, was an extensive community-wide conversation that we had, again, during the pandemic, which led for a long conversation with a lot of thoughtful dialogue back and forth. So it really grows out of the DDA's master plan, which that process began a couple years ago, and then just absolutely backstopped and reaffirmed by the city's comprehensive master plan as well. So as it noted in the memo from Ms. Kaplansky, the process started largely in 2018, And we went through this process with professionals, the Winter Group, and they led this. They brought their professional expertise. So this is not something that we have based on untested principles. It's something that we have seen work in other places yet again. So again, being on those best practices and forming the guidance for how we move forward. Like in the last item, we again relied on a task force, a multidisciplinary task force of the DDA, City Council, Planning Commission, and city staff. And they were assembled to provide valuable feedback in addition to what Winter and Company does. So get the national view of the best practices that are incorporated across the world and certainly across our country, and then also the hyperlocal, Berkeley-specific, here's what matters to us view as well. So this document does come to you. It's well-tested, it's well-affirmed, and it has a Berkeley feel to it. It has that caringness that we tout right in our city logo, or right in our city motto. And so you see the document is included there in full. Planning Commission has reviewed this as well. It comes to you with their recommendation. They spent quite a bit of time talking about it, as our liaison can attest, and we proudly present it forward to you this evening.
Mr. McGinnis, anything you would like to add? You don't have to.
Good evening to this honorable body. Thank you for the opportunity. Very briefly, I just want to acknowledge Director Kapolansky's work on the implementation phase, and also predecessors with the Downtown Development Authority, board members, volunteers, but also the businesses that are in our DDA footprint, because they foot the bill for the design guidelines. It was a substantial investment, but done to enhance our downtown. And just as a great example, it's a really effective tool when a new business or an existing property owner wants to take their property to the next level, give it a new lease on life. And they're sometimes looking to the city for guidance of, well, what are you looking for? What's going to make it nicer? And it's a lot more effective to provide them something comprehensive that's cohesive with the implementation ordinance to say, this is the Berkeley standard. This is what would really wow the residents and the patrons and prospective investment in this site. So it deals with the site work, it deals with new construction, it deals with renovation, and then also with signs. And so when it comes to economic development of our downtown, it's a best practice to be able to have this. And so I just want to acknowledge all the work that went into it over the years and the way that your community development director has worked on the implementation in a very collaborative way. So I'm grateful for your consideration and look forward to reporting back to the downtown businesses and our downtown board of directors the outcome. Thank you.
Thank you, Mike. Discussion from council. Or residents, certainly.
Charles Terrell from Berkeley. My view on this has not changed because the whole thing has not changed since, what was it, about 2018? This is the same feedback that I gave them at that time. The Winter Group, is that their name? Yeah.
Group Winter and Company.
By codifying this, they're no longer guidelines, they are mandates. The document is poorly written for mandates. It says things should be this way or should be that way. How do you measure should? How does a building department or a planning commission work on something that should be, but doesn't have to be because we have built-in discretion on implementation, on interpretation? How do you measure how much discretion that they have? If you get into a dispute with a developer, how do you measure that? There are things in the guidelines, they talk about things like the character of the proposed building or the proposed change to a facade. How do you measure character? How do you measure that that's within character for that area? There is nothing in there. And unfortunately, the entire document is ripe with the things that are part of the guidelines, but they can't be measured. Therefore, they're not really guidelines. You can't measure it, you can't codify it, you can't put it in an ordinance because you can't measure it and you can't enforce it. And all it's going to do is lead to more disputes. what I told them back in 2018 the same thing, but it still came through with that kind of wishy-washy language in there. If you can't measure it, you can't build to it. So it's got to be, if it's guidelines, fine, it's guidelines. And like Mr. McGinnis said, if somebody wants to know, what do you want us to do? Here's some guidelines. But to codify it, have it be part of the master plan, have it in ordinance form, no. You can't do that because it's not measurable, it's not enforceable. And all it's going to do is lead to more work for Mr. Starron. We can't have that. It just got to stop, and I guess now is the time to stop it.
Thank you, Chuck.
Jonas Reimer, Berkeley, specifically Harvard Road, student at Berkeley High School. I want to say when it comes to downtown Berkeley that it could definitely be, now from what I understand, there is a certain section of the 12-mile corridor within Berkeley that is considered downtown, and there's a few other buildings in a downtown style outside of it. Am I correct?
There is a downtown.
Yes, all right. I wanted to say that when it comes to stylizing it, I believe that there should be as much opportunity for there to be buildings that are mixed use as possible. I also believe that there should be overall in the city, but in downtown as well, more housing. People want to move to Berkeley, but there is a limited housing supply due to R1 zoning. If we build it everywhere in general, but I'm going to talk about downtown for this one because that's what it's related to. We can, and this ties into mixed use, you wouldn't really need to go out to Troy to eat dinner. You could just walk down the steps of your home and you'll be at a restaurant. That's a pretty quick way to get to places you want to. And downtown is designed for walking in general. And one thing I would recommend for downtown Berkeley is, well, bike lanes, because what I see downtown, I'm not thinking of another road to get somewhere else. I'm thinking of a place to go to. It is the end, not a means to an end. And I also would like to see some more development along the 12-mile in general. Some places necessarily not inside of the considered the downtown district from what I've seen on the zoning map, but say the 12-mile district, or maybe see some more developments on overall just stuff that I would like to see. There are some lots I've seen empty for ages. There are some buildings that I don't think are used, and I would like to see some of them repurposed for, say, housing or new businesses, or overall just stuff that would help improve the downtown area. Now, if I recall, somebody was talking about walls. And if I interpret that correctly, that means making downtown look like an average street. So if you go down to downtown Detroit and it feels like you're in an outdoor room, that's what I feel like we should be giving off. We should be densifying downtown to a point where it feels more pleasant to be in. It's a very ideal place to stay and go to. It's not just another place you pass through on the way to somewhere else, And so I would like to see downtown reflect more of a community center instead of just a few buildings on the side of a road, which right now is the feeling I get unless it's like an event. I barely see that many people walking unless it's the evening, and I would like to see more of that happening. I would like to see downtown feel more like an actual experience rather than just something like, I don't know, a Big Beaver in Troy. So yeah, I would overall like to see downtown Berkeley more densified and more safer for pedestrians and cyclists and more friendly towards them and less what many people have called a strode. So.
Thank you, Jonas.
Hello, Kurt Hyde again, Robina. The DDA, the guidelines, I was involved in a big get-together that they had where they had a lot of input from the community. And I thought that was for whatever criticism you can have, I thought that was really well done. I mean, I think you had so many different groups put in input in there. Now, when they came out with the document, my biggest concern with the document was the fact that I think originally, and I've tried to scan through, and I apologize, I didn't prepare ahead of time. Originally, it was recommending reduction of requirements for parking. And that was probably the biggest thing I was against, because what I felt that the guidelines did was the fact that it obviously not only did it give us a good look and appeal on street side, it also set forth, depending on lot size, ways that you can protect the neighborhoods, which I thought was a good step forward. It was only my issue with the parking that I thought, well, no, you can't. You're going backwards. If you take away the parking, you got people parking them down the streets, and that's kind of damaging what I felt the guidelines would do. And so, if there's nothing with lowering requirement of parking, then I think that's a good step forward. I mean, people can be upset about the ultimate choice, and I hear valid concerns about how you're going to measure or how you're going to enforce it if it's not, written to say this is what it must do. If it's kind of like if everything's well, if you feel like this is meeting it, it's meeting it, then I think you might end up running into more problems, than what you're solving, because I do agree with what was said, by Chuck, even that it almost seems like it's just like the whole how you're going to measure the road diet is. If you don't have it set in stone beforehand, what you're going to allow and what you're not, then you're almost going to allow, it's going to be whoever's sitting in that chair approving it. And it's not necessarily what's going to, because I like a lot of the designs that the community came up with. And this gentleman right here, I want to applaud him for all of his observations as far as ideas. I think if you were able to get him some of the resources and some of the stuff, he would find out there's a lot of support for mixed-use buildings on 12 Mile and Coolidge. And the citizens actually have had input on that, so expressing support for those kind of things. But his idea is just to come up here and to say that. I have to applaud that. I really loved hearing that and thought it was really interesting. But I think if he would, if he had a chance to get a hold of some of that stuff, he would find out that there's a lot of people that would support more kind of mixed use or residential housing of some kind on Coolidge, on 12 Mile, even on 11 Mile. The guidelines as far as what they look and what it was trying, as far as protecting the neighborhood, I loved it. But if there's anything in there about reducing parking requirements, I'm against that. And there was a issue with a certain property that that was one of the other concerns. They were actually identifying a property and saying, we're going to remove this and put a lot here. How would you feel about that? And up till then, it was always, you were not allowed to talk about specific properties. And we just felt that was it kind of created or are you putting the cart before the horse and creating a condition where that happens? And I think some people that were uneasy about the guidelines, that was one thing that we could point towards. And if we want to be clear, we were talking about the Hartfield's property and putting the road and saying, we're going to put a public lot there. Well, I don't think that was fair. And I just wanted to make sure that was clear. That's what we were talking about. But thank you. Have a good day.
Discussion from council. Oh, I thought you were pointing. Councilmember Hanna.
Yeah. First, I'll agree that the guidelines aren't enforceable, and that's why we have two different items before us tonight. First are the guidelines, which are overarching goals, things we'd like to see. And then we have separate the ordinance, which is a subset of the guidelines. And and it's not all of the guidelines, and they are things that I do feel are enforceable. The first draft that I looked over of the ordinance that we look at next did have some of those touchy-feely, intangible things that you just couldn't, that a planning commission wouldn't be able to rule on, and those didn't make it into this draft. And so I'm happy to see that. And it's also common practice for there to be objective standards, something you can measure, and discretionary standards. That's existing in our code. That's widely accepted practice and well-developed law on how to handle it. So with the guidelines and the ordinance as separate documents, I'm comfortable with both. I do want to address Mr. Height's comments on parking. You know, we've already acknowledged that the parking section in this is outdated. We've already started working on a new parking study to replace this. That's, you know, already started. And then the specific mentions to Hartfield were removed, and it was more generic examples so that, you know, we didn't have that miscommunication that we're targeting a specific parcel.
Thank you. Additional feedback from council? See it that way. Councilmember Baker.
Just, thank you, Your Honor. Just building on the specifics, I'd like to just take a step back more broadly and express my gratitude to the DDA, to the Planning Commission, and to staff and all the volunteers and residents that have been a part of the process and contributed the many ideas to help put together these guidelines so that our downtown continues to develop and grow and become even more welcoming as a destination as opposed to a thoroughfare. I see we've made some tremendous progress in so many ways, and this is another very important tool in our toolbox to help provide that guidance and the specifics as appropriate to help continue the development and progression of our downtown as a premier destination in Southeast Michigan. Thank you.
Thank you, and just to kind of bring this back to prior comments, again, it's maybe not what most consider perfect, and there were changes and there were things that needed to be fixed, and they have been addressed. And again, we are looking at ways to continue to support our downtown to be as inviting as we all know it can and as vibrant, and being able to have these guidelines finally in place is only going to help us to be able to do that a little bit more in the future, and hopefully a little bit more efficient. And things will continue to change and evolve as we move forward. But with that, Ms. Mitchell, would you please call the roll on R2422?
Gavin,
Yes.
Hennon,
Yes.
Price,
Yes.
Valani,
Yes.
Baker,
Yes.
Dean,
Yes.
Turbrack.
Yes. Ms. Mitchell, it's time to get into ordinance time.
Ordinance number 0622, matter of considering the first reading of an ordinance to amend section 94-5 exempt signs, signs permitting in non-residential districts, in chapter 94 signs of the City of Berkley Code of Ordinances, and sections 138-32, 138-143, 138-222, 138-526, 138-527, 138-679, and 138-680 of Chapter 138 zoning to implement the downtown design guidelines.
Is there a motion to approve 0622?
So moved.
Support.
Motion made by Councilmember Baker with support from Councilmember Hennon. Mr. Baumgarten?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. As Councilmember Hennon said just a few minutes ago, this is actually codifying some of the standards that we've developed over the course of this conversation. This also comes to you with support from the Planning Commission, who held the public hearing, is really comfortable with these. It shouldn't be lost on anyone that in many of the cases, the ultimate site plan review comes before Planning Commission, a resident-led board, and they're the ones that actually give approval. The document or the guidelines, nor the updates to these ordinances here, none of those fiat that in any way. So it still does come before Planning Commission. So their approval here, their comfort with this document, I think is pretty important, because they know that they're the final arbiter of a lot of the standards you're going to see here. Chapter 138, I see that comes up a lot. Should note that's our zoning code. So most of this does affect the zoning codes for the various zoning districts that we have. Again, to some of our previous conversations, our zoning code, as we know, we're planning to essentially update the entire thing. So likely it's going to be some form of a ground up build. And so I hope anybody who is interested in things like parking standards as well as uses do join us for those conversations. Jonas, I hope you're absolutely there at the table for those conversations. But this is a limited, as the ordinance says, a limited update based on the approval of the design guidelines. So this is actually putting the force of weight behind there.
Additional questions for City Manager on 0622? We've already talked about. We know where these are coming from. We know what they're intended to. Then, seeing no additional questions or comments, Ms. Mitchell, would you please call the roll on 0622?
Hennon,
Yes.
Price,
Yes.
Valani,
Yes.
Baker,
Yes.
Dean,
Yes.
Gavin,
Yes.
Turbrack.
Yes. Ms. Mitchell, would you please read item number 9?
Ordinance number 0722, matter of considering the first reading of an ordinance to amend Article 12, residential grading and drainage standards, to Chapter 26, buildings and building regulations of the City of Berkeley Code of Ordinances to modify standards for residential grading and drainage and to prescribe a penalty for violations.
Is there a motion to approve 0722?
So moved.
Support.
Motion made by Councilmember Hennan with support from Councilmember Price. Mr. Baumgarten?
Thanks, Mayor. On the topic of standards not always being perfect, we bring you another iteration of our grading ordinance. This is an area that we have had a lot of conversation with over multiple years. We keep developing a standard. We get to put it in action. We get to see how it works. We get to see if it actually goes to address the issue that we're trying to solve here. And then we don't like leaving ordinances as static documents, especially if we know there's some portion of it that don't work. So we came before the City Council many months ago and asked for a moratorium in all instances other than residential new construction in order to better tailor an ordinance standard to the type of projects that we're seeing and not put an overly burdensome standard on our residents who maybe just want to do some small project. And so this work culminates on public safety public works conversations, our engineers conversations, community development conversations, and then also with our building official as well, in order to try to strike the best balance possible for all of these projects. So you see outlined in the memo, included in your packet, the changes that this ordinance advocates. And then you also see in the text of the ordinance itself how those are phrased and how the wording would come in. Still does fully apply to residential new construction. It does change some of the standards as far as individuals that want to change the footprint of their home or 50% principal building, which is in most cases a home, by more than 50%. But we do acknowledge that in the instances where topographic studies are required in order to prove the flow of drainage, make sure that you understand where your water goes and make sure how much water you take from the neighboring properties. We do understand that those are expensive, and we are trying to work around those cases. So we don't turn a $3,000 project into an $8,000 project simply to meet the standards, which is an instance, as we talked about before, that started happening over and over and over again. Stormwater in Berkeley is going to continue to be a battle, especially as weather patterns change. But again, we think this is the cutting edge of the best practices that we could implement for our community. But again, if better processes come along, if more information is needed in the future, this is an area that we will likely be revisiting on a somewhat frequent cycle, probably over the course of multiple years.
Questions for our city manager? Is that a hand up? No, it's not. No. Councilmember Hennan?
I'll just comment that Mr. Baumgarten stole all my thunder. So, those are
Unintentional.
Pretty much all the points I was going to make. So, thank you.
Okay, sure.
I was absent during a lot of, Kurt Height, resident of Berkeley, Robina. I was absent during a lot of the discussions for the water drainage. So I just want to, the first thing that stands out is I see that residential building by more than 50%, that is a substantial increase in size for a footprint of a house. And the amount of runoff you're going to have towards the street or towards your neighbor's properties is going to be huge for that amount. I mean, if it was 25, I think I would feel a little bit better. 50% is a big difference in what happens with the water. The problem is you with the many years that we've had of residents where they say, oh, they built this big house and now I got this problem. To me, when you're building a house and you're digging a hole for a basement, to me, I think the requirements should be more stringent now more than ever, because with the larger homes, that has been part of our problem that's contributing to it, because we've had more homes now than we had before. We have larger homes. We have more runoff. And along with that, we have sewers now that, and the relining of the sewers, while it's a good thing because it saves money, you're not having to replace the sewers, it also, you're constricting it somewhat because you're making it a smaller diameter. So it's like, same thing if you take your bathroom sink and you take a bucket of water and try to pour it in, you get overflow. And that's why now, even though, yes, we have sewers that are relined, they don't carry as much water. So now we have more homes because more double lots have 2 homes that were bigger than what was there before. You have more water going towards the streets. If you're not going to require a water runoff, or a water drainage plan for up to 50%, you're just asking for more of the same problems, but even worse. I would contend that really you should say, if we're going to allow larger homes, there should be a plan right away when you dig the basement to put in a drain thing for water runoff to go into a French well or a septic, or not septic, a tank, so that it can disperse the water slowly rather than draining it towards the street. Come out with the plan ahead of time, because when you build that into the plan and they dig for the hole for the basement, they can put that in. You're not paying $8,000. That's $8,000 to repair the problem if you have a water drainage. So if you come up with the plan first, you actually save money and say, since we're allowing the bigger homes, we're building in the plan to say we're going to account for the water runoff ahead of time, so you're not adding to the problem in the street. And I just really wish that that would be something that somebody was focused on, because that would save a lot of the heartache of residents that when they do have a problem, there is no plan for resolution. It's, I have a problem, what are we going to do? And everybody just kind of, nobody came up with a plan. And I think that going forward, and I've been saying this since probably 2017, I've mentioned a couple times, there should be a plan ahead of time to say, if we're going to allow for the larger homes, the plan, the guidelines for building a large home should include, you have to have plans for the water runoff, something that would disperse the water slowly into your own property, and as far as grading, because we know with a larger home, it's going to create grading issues and water issues, and there's no system in place that is economically feasible for the city to enforce going after the builders after there's a water issue. There's just nothing. There's no recourse. That the owners of the property that are affected have to find their own ways of solving it, and 9 times out of 10, it's out of their pocket. And I just think that going forward, it should be in part of the plans requiring it, and it's not $8,000. It's a lot less money because they're already digging the hole for the basement. You can put that in the plan in the backyard, dig it at the same time. You got the tool there. You're just removing the dirt, you're putting something in, and then you can put the gutters going towards that, and it's not going towards the street anymore. That's all I'm saying. Thank you.
Thank you. And again, this doesn't say that there are no grading plans. It says that there are grading plans that would be required for this.
What's that?
There are grading plans that are required for any new
Right, but
construction or
just saying
anything else.
you wouldn't include it for if it's below 50%.
Now, grading plans would continue to be required for all new single-family residential principal buildings, and would also be required for any additions that increase the footprint of the principal building by more than 50%.
Okay, I was reading that first paragraph, but I mean, I would like to see that they account for taking in the water rather than.
Want to make sure we're on the same page.
Right. And it's worth noting too that any addition that's living space that is more than 300 feet require at least a topographical study,
right.
even if not
And
a
that.
grading plan is needed. But if the topographical study yields that this will become problematic from a stormwater standpoint, we do have the ability to require a grading plan at that section.
Right.
But yes, the 50% standard is anything that's an addition more than 50%. We would put that in the category of residential new build, which has never been exempted from this study, even during the moratorium.
Correct. Okay. Councilmember Hannan?
Yeah, and to build on that, this is our third stab at this. Our second iteration included, this for all new construction and a lot of additions. But during this moratorium period, we kept it for new builds, and we've found it very successful. That's why we didn't change it. It has resulted in something I've heard several times is people said, hey, the new build went in and now my existing water problems have gone away. So we've actually found where it's, instead of causing flooding in a wider area, it's remediating flooding in a wider area that wasn't even the subject property's fault to begin with. So, that part hasn't changed. There's still standards between, it's a lesser standard, but between 300 square feet and the 50% addition. And it's only if you have a 300 square feet or less, fairly small that this doesn't get triggered. So I'm very comfortable with where we're at now. Do we still have it perfect? Probably not, but we'll continue. It will continue getting more and closer to that, ideal.
Okay, thank you. Seeing no additional questions, and thank you for the clarity there, making sure we all understand what we were talking about there. Ms. Mitchell, would you please call the roll on 00722?
Price,
Yes.
Valani,
Yes.
Baker,
Yes.
Dean,
Yes.
Gavin,
Yes.
Hennan,
Yes.
Turbrack.
Yes. Ms. Mitchell, would you please read item number 10?
Ordinance number 0822, matter of considering the first reading of an ordinance to amend section 30-187, general provisions, and section 30-188, registration of rental properties in chapter 30, businesses of the City of Berkeley Code of Ordinances to require registration and inspection of short-term rentals of an entire structure.
Is there a motion to approve 00822?
So moved.
Support?
Motion made by Mayor Pro Tem Dean with support from Councilmember Villani. Mr. Baumgarten?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Community Development Director Krista Kaplansky worked closely with the city attorney on this item, and so I will defer to Mr. Sterin on this item.
Thank you, Mr. Baumgarten. The ordinance is pretty straightforward and it relates to short-term rentals. The council's aware we already have a rental property registration ordinance. This ordinance is intended to, I guess, clarify or more expressly state that it's intended that short-term rental properties would also be subject to the rental registration requirement. And there's some cosmetic changes here, just kind of rewording and moving some words around just to make the ordinance read more clearly. So that's what this does. Ms. Kaplansky in her memo did raise I guess a question or a consideration for council to possibly provide direction on, and that is as written, a rental or a short-term rental for any period of time would be subject to the registration requirement. She's just asking, did the council want to consider putting some type of time limit in there? For instance, we might not require rental registration for rentals of less than whatever, 15, 20, 25, pick your threshold, but that's really what her question is. Difficulty with that is we have detection problems with these. We have detection problems with determining whether a short-term rental is even going on. Typically, those are driven by neighbor observations, even neighbor complaints. But would be a little bit on the honor system if we did put a time limit like that, saying if you rent your property for no more than 15 days a year, you don't need to register, but if you do, it's not. But we don't have the short-term rental police out there keeping keeping tabs or tracks on how long these are out there. But just a thought. I've probably been talking more here than it takes to read the ordinance, but that's the idea here, is to just clarify that short-term rentals are to be subject to our rental property registration requirement.
Well, let's start with the second question first. As Mr. Sterin alluded to, that is not a overly lengthy read here, but per Ms. Kaplansky's memo, is there a desire of council to point out a specific number of days to qualify as short-term rental? No. Councilmember Hennan?
Yeah, so I would argue yes. And the reason being is, the target isn't the person that's renting their house out during Dream Cruise for a week. And while, detection is, would be difficult, but we don't want to require a license and an inspection for that sort of situation, and this ordinance would, as written right now. And ordinances, while we do rely on the honor system, most people are good, and people do check ordinances, and, it also becomes an educational tool. Okay, 14 days, as an example. They're not going after, they're not worried about me. I can do it just for a weekend or, a short time. But if somebody is, say, a snowbird going to Florida and they're renting it out for 5 months, yeah, I think we should take a look at that. That's a long enough period that we should be doing an inspection and having the license on that.
The group that you mentioned, Dream Cruise, I don't necessarily, I agree that's not the target of this, and unfortunately, I think, in my opinion at least, if there is some sort of limitation, I think that we're gonna find ourselves still in the position that we're in right now from time to time with the conversation that's happening that brought this to our attention in the first place, but certainly open to, Councilmember Price, did you have, I thought you had your hand up for a minute there.
I did. I guess I'd like to know a little bit about the benefits of the requirements, licensing and inspections, what those bring, like in terms of peace of mind of renters, right? If I'm renting a place for a week during Dream Cruise or 5 months during the winter, what the burden of this potentially being on the people that I'm renting from? What are some of the benefits that come along with those inspections and licensing, these processes that we're considering adding? That's what I'm interested in hearing more about. So if I'm a homeowner, I'm interested in renting my house out, what would I need to go through in terms of licensing and inspections?
Sure. Our building official is the one that, or building official, building inspector are the ones that do those. Whether they're aware of it or not, they know, whether the renter is aware of it or not, the house is maintained to a specific standard set forth by the building code. And so there are a number of things that we look for, both with general safety items, such smoke detectors, hand railings on stairs. I know we look at make sure that there's a distinguishment between potable and non-potable water. So if they're using a hose or something like that, they don't have water coming back into the potable water supply. There are just a number of different things that we know that as a community we've set that standard, and it's the same standard that would apply to any long-term rentals too. Like I said, a renter may be completely unaware of it, but that it's provided to them. That benefit's provided to them nonetheless.
See, I would argue I'm interested in that benefit being provided to renters, whether they're renting for a week or 6 months. Go ahead.
And, well, I would say someone that is an owner that's living there for 50 weeks out of the year and then renting it for 2 weeks, they are not necessarily, but likely living in safe conditions for themselves and maintaining the property, to their own standard of living. And so, I think the implication would be then, in those very short duration time periods, they would, in all likelihood, be safe and protected.
Councilmember Baker?
Oh, thank you, Your Honor. I find this conversation really interesting. And again, I appreciate you guys bringing this to us this evening. I'm wondering from a sort of like a level of service that the city provides. So, ideally, if one were to register their home as a short-term rental for a weekend or for 4 months or whatever, if we were to go with no grace window, would that put an undue burden on the city to be able to do all of these inspections in a timely manner? Like if a week and a half before Dream Cruise, I decide to rent out my house and then I would need to get it inspected, obviously, before I could list it and all those kinds of things. Would there be, so that's the first question is, do we feel like we could handle it? And then the second thing is back to the overarching theme. We've seen tonight that we've revisited ordinances based on learning. And so, we could find that if we're just, getting all sorts of either complaints or delays in the ability to provide these safe inspections for those quick rentals, then we could always come back and amend this to add a buffer if needed. So any thoughts on that first question about our ability to do this in a timely manner?
You know, as authored, I do believe it's within reach for the city. Certainly for any of the rentals that are registered with us or that the owner voluntarily comes forth, we are going to have a hard time, but it's not undue in any way, but we will be sort of chasing these to a certain extent. But we look at Airbnb, we look at VRBO, we look at any of the sites to see kind of who's around. Anyway, generally speaking, just sort of tracking the number of homes that are used like this. And so that would be kind of our guide. I know Director Kaplansky, and through Councilmember Hennon's suggestion, is trying to reach out to say, hey, do you guys have like preemptive reports for municipalities on the number of people? If we give you a zip code, will you tell us everybody that's using it in this way? Have not had success there yet. But again, because they have to advertise in all the public places, we are able to see the same information that any prospective renter would see too.
Okay, good. So what I think you answered my question. Basically, as we see those listings pop up, and ideally they come to City Hall or fill out the form, it would not be an undue burden on city to perform those inspections in a timely manner, so we wouldn't cause a delay in their ability to list.
Right. Our billing officials here 5 days a week. We would be able to schedule those.
Okay,
Yeah.
thank you.
Councilmember Bellotti?
A few questions. So back to the licensing inspection, so it's not a burden on the city, which is great. Can you ballpark like the cost to the homeowner for the inspection and all of that, and how long that would be valid for?
I can't do that accurately. My
Okay.
apologies for that. But it is good for 1 year. I don't know the cost, but the rental inspections we do now are annual.
Okay. And I would just like to say, I know there was some discussion earlier about the differences in time, and people live to their own standard, but I think own standards vary, which is why we have all of these. And I will say, as someone who was a long-term renter in Berkley for a period of time, I remember having inspectors come in, and without fail, even though I thought I was living in a safe place, they found things that my landlord needed to fix every time. So whether it was smoke detectors, all kinds of issues, I just think the value of the safety that can provide is something that just helps us maintain that quality of life. And if it's not something that's a significant burden, quite frankly, even if it was a burden, I think maybe that's the burden of safety. You can't put a price tag on that.
Thank you. Councilmember Gavin?
Thank you, Your Honor. Yeah, and to build off, I guess, a couple different comments here, I think one of the points that I'm kind of grappling with here a little bit is that, I can understand an individual who's looking at kind of maybe a 2-week or a 1-week rental and looking at renting out their home for that. I also think that maybe there are different standards that Councilmember Villani talked about, but I think in the end, that burden then falls on the individual who is looking to be able to use their home as a short-term rental, just in the context of really making sure that it doesn't have an onerous effect on neighbors surrounding that individual. And so I think that would, if making sure that, there's not some undue burden for people living around that specific home, I think that the burden then rightly would then fall on the individual looking to use their home as a short-term rental.
I'm not a fan of just throwing regulations out to regulations, even though that's what most people think municipalities do. More red tape is better. That is not the case. There's a reason we're discussing this. Okay, there are things that have happened that we've seen, trends that continue to happen in our community that aren't overly pleasant for some of our residents, and we've heard about that. And at the end of the day, this could all be moot if the state decides that they're going to take charge of things and not give us a choice. But while we do have a choice, it's not necessarily an undue burden. But if you want to Airbnb or VRBO or whatever you want to do, God bless, but you got to be inspected, and we need to know that. That's my thoughts, at least right now. Now, before I call for a roll call vote, I do want to, one more time, though, just whether we want to have a limit on the days. I know Councilmember Hennon, yes, and when we talked the first time was no, but I want to give everybody does anybody else want to have a day in there or amount of time, duration? No?
Not at this time. If we need it later, we can come back. But I feel comfortable coming into this.
We can change it.
Yeah.
Okay.
And if I could just add, I pushed forward hard for this ordinance. I had always intended that there be a time limit. I'm not very happy that we don't have it, but I am still going to vote in favor of it. The neighborhood protection aspect of it is the other part that I find important, and having a registered list of where these places are, I think will be a benefit to the neighborhoods in general.
Okay. Thank you.
Mr. Mayor. Ms. Kaplansky is one of the millions watching from home, and she did with the assist, coming through with the assist here. The cost is $180 for inspection and $60 for registration.
Well, I'm glad she's feeling
Not
well
an
enough
undue
to
burden.
do that, and that everybody can still see us, so wonderful. Perfect. All right. Then, seeing no more discussion here, Ms. Mitchell, would you please call the roll on O0822?
Valani,
Yes.
Baker,
Yes.
Dean,
Yes.
Gavin,
Yes.
Hennon,
Yes.
Price,
Yes.
Turbrack.
Yes. Ms. Mitchell, would you please read item number 11?
Motion number M10622, matter of considering the formation of an ad hoc committee to fill a city council vacancy.
Is there a motion to approve M10622?
So moved.
Motion made by
Support.
Councilmember Gavin with support from Mayor Pro Tem Dean. Mr. Baumgarten, what are we doing?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Bittersweet agenda item this evening. We have, of course, loved having Ms. Price serve the city of Berkeley, but we're ecstatic that she now serves Berkeley and several other communities now, as she's moving on to become a legislator in the Michigan House of Representatives. So in order to fill the vacancy, council has already actually platted out the course here. You have adopted in your rules and procedures the manner by which you spend the 30 days mandated by the city's charter to fulfill the vacancy that will be coming up here. So I have provided you a memo that provides sort of those steps, summarizes Section 7 of your adopted rules and procedures. And one of the first item that we can do to act upon the resignation, which is included in your packet, is to form the ad hoc committee. Again, membership is outlined as the mayor pro tem, the most senior member of council, and the most junior member of council as far as tenures, not ages. So in this case, as included in the memo, our Mayor Pro Tem, Bridget Dean, would serve as the chair of that committee, and it would feature Councilmember Baker as well as Councilmember Villani. And they would, should the council receive more than 5 applicants for the open position here, they would go through a scoring process, which is outlined in your packet, as well as the rules and procedures. They would bring that number down to 5. Those 5 individuals would be invited to speak before the council, likely at the December 5th meeting. And they sort of make a presentation to you. All applicants would be invited, but those would be the 5 that are very specifically said, please be there that evening. The subcommittee still provides all applications, all scoring materials to you, so each member of council can make up their own mind. After the presentation, council will go through a process of sort of straw polling until we get down to an individual. And while I suggest we wait until the December 19th meeting to do that, council would have the purview of either appointing that evening, but we would recommend the 19th to allow the clerk time to prepare the materials needed for the swearing of a new individual. And then the appointment and the swearing in would both happen on December 19th, satisfying the 30-day requirement set forth by charter, which starts this evening. So anybody interested in applying for council, those application materials, should the council move forward on this, would be available tomorrow. And we recommend, because of the Thanksgiving holiday, going beyond the 5 days required in the rules and procedures and keeping it open through Tuesday morning, start of business. And then ask the subcommittee to quickly meet during the course of that week in order to have the packet ready to go for each of you guys at least by the Friday prior to the 5th. So that is, in summary, of the challenge before council to find somebody worthy of sitting in the chair that Councilmember Price currently occupies.
Well, thank you, and certainly, first off, congratulations to House of Representative member-elect, former council member, still council member today, Natalie Price. It has been a little while since we have done this, but we certainly did a very thorough job in codifying how we are going to do this moving forward. based on some of the things that we ran into last time. So it is nice to have that prepared, even though it is under some bittersweet circumstances, certainly, and additional questions on the process and procedure that we are going to follow. Councilmember Baker?
Thank you. No real questions per se, other than I'm glad to see that we removed the talent portion of this year. I think that's good, and you know, just again, congratulations. I think that's great.
All right, excellent. Seeing, oh,
I was just going to say, Mr. Baumgarten, could you, for our vast viewership at home, maybe reiterate how long their term would last and all of that, just for anyone who's new to the process?
Certainly. Councilmember House Representative elect Price, I need to get used to that as well. Her term would already end on November of 2023, and so we'd be asking to fulfill that. Should she be in their first year of a new one, it would still run through the next biannual election available. So either way, they'd be voting to fulfill that position in November of 23.
excellent. Thank you. Ms. Mitchell, then would you please call the roll on M10622?
Baker,
Yes.
Dean,
Yes.
Gavin,
Yes.
Hennan,
Yes.
Price,
Yes.
Valani,
Yes.
Turbrack.
Yes. Ms. Mitchell, would you please read item number 12 on tonight's agenda?
Resolution number R2522, matter of designating the time and place of city council meetings and approving its rules and order of procedure.
Is there a motion to approve R2522?
So moved. Support.
Motion made by Councilmember Price with support from Councilmember Villani. Mr. Baumgarten, anything we need to pay attention to here?
Annual item that comes before you each year. That's, as far as the calendar goes, we did carry forth the rules and procedures mandated first and third Monday were applicable. There are a couple of exceptions to that item. It has been our practice for the last couple of years. We moved the August meeting to the second Monday in order to avoid a conflict between the potential for elections, as well as the third Monday tends to be the one after Dream Cruise. The week leading up to that is a pretty significant burden on several of our departments. Not a great time for them to try to be putting forth agenda items as well. So we did carry forth that practice. Other than that, they're in the packet for you to take a look at.
Seeing, well, I don't know if there are any questions or comments, but I didn't see anybody jumping up. There usually isn't a ton on this. Seeing no questions or comments, Ms. Mitchell, would you please call the roll on our rules and procedures, R2522?
Dean,
Yes.
Gavin,
Yes.
Hennan,
Yes.
Price,
Yes.
Valani,
Yes.
Baker,
Yes.
Turbrack.
Yes. Mr. Baumgarten, are there any updates for us, please?
Yes, Mr. Mayor. Just two items. Before our next meeting, we'll have two fun events. The first is the Holiday Lights Parade, which is going to be Saturday. The first Saturday in December, as is our standard. It's going to be a fun-filled day of all sorts of good events. There's going to be carriage rides, there's going to be warming stations, s'more stands. It'll be a really, really fun day all in all. Again, that's the first Saturday in December. No one wants to miss it, including culminating in our big Holiday Lights Parade and tree lighting as approved by a council at a previous meeting. On the Thursday and Friday prior to that, we'll be continuing our tradition of driving Santa around the city to make sure that all the good boys and girls of Berkley get a chance to see him and wave hello. And so, again, that's the Thursday and Friday prior. We'll start about 6:30, just after dusk, so we get the full benefit of the lighted displays and trailers that Public Works are currently working on. They're kind enough to build that for Santa every year and take him around around our fine city. So 6:30 to 9, we'll have more information about that coming out as far as route details. But as with the years previous, you can follow our Santa tracker, which is gives live updates throughout the drive, so you know when he's coming. But most people just hear the ho ho ho's and start running out to say hello. So a fun-filled week coming up and a one that's absolutely just chock full of holiday cheer.
Well, thank you. There will be no council communications this evening. Instead, we are going to end the meeting as we began. honoring our friend Jamie. You know, there's nothing that anybody can say that can alleviate the pain and sadness that his family and friends feel right now. But everybody who knew Jamie, I don't care if you were in front of him when he was your judge or not, will tell you that he was truly one of the best in every sense of the word and everything that he did. You know, his legacy, not only in our community and in our city, is certainly going to live on forever in the hearts of all of us, everybody that knew him. And I didn't think it made sense to do anything else other than to yield all of our time out of respect to Jamie this evening. Rest in peace, Your Honor. Motion to adjourn was made by Mayor Pro Tem Dean with support from Councilmember Baker. Ms. Mitchell, would you please call the roll?
Hennan,
Yes.
Price,
Yes.
Malani,
Yes.
Baker,
Yes.
Dean,
Yes.
Gavin,
Yes.
Turbrack.
Yes. November 21st, 2022 regular meeting of the Berkeley City Council is adjourned.